As you can see behind me, I have my We the People flag, the Betsy Ross flag, a throwback to the first flag that was created for our nation. Our founding fathers, they had the foresight to pen our Constitution with We the People, not We the Men. So this video today is just to remind all of my brothers and sisters in America that women are people. Um, so I happened upon a TikTok live today in which a man was arguing with the content creator that women should not have the right to choose regarding abortion or what happens to their body because as a farmer on his farm, his cows and his pigs do not have the right to choose. And that as a farmer, he does everything within his power to ensure that his cows and his sows birth every unborn baby. Um, so I was a little taken aback by the idea that women in this country um, are a little more than livestock on a farm to breed calves and piglets for production in the economy. And so with this obvious move towards Project 2025 that we've been seeing with all these appointments of authors of Project 2025 being passed through Senate confirmations in Washington, D.C., it's become apparent that in 2025, if we do not stand up, women are no longer going to be considered people. We are going to be considered livestock or breeding stock. And I will point to Project 2025, the Health and Human Services section, chapter, whatever you want to call it. I have it on my screen here. I'll just read it to you. Goal number 1 for the Department of Health and Human Services under Project 2025, which is now going to be run by RFK Jr., who apparently did well in maybe law school due to a heroin addiction and a brainworm. I don't know, do what you want with that information. But goal number 1, Project 2025 for the Department of Health and Human Services is protecting life, conscience, and bodily integrity. The Secretary, RFK Jr., should pursue a robust agenda to protect the fundamental right to life, protect conscience rights, and uphold bodily integrity rooted in biological realities, not ideology. From the moment of conception, every human being possesses inherent dignity and worth, and our humanity does not depend on our age, our state of development, our race, or our abilities. Now, while I applaud them for saying that our inherent value doesn't stem from our age, stage of development, race, or abilities, the frightening thing here is that they have created a government policy, since it's being adopted by the federal government, that says life begins at conception. That is a 100% religious tenet. It is completely in violation of the separation of church and state, which that's a whole nother issue. But there are several religions around the world that do not believe life begins at conception. We had a heavily medically influenced court opinion, Roe v. Wade, from the early 70s that relied on information from doctors from the Mayo Clinic that agreed life did not begin at conception. We have been overtaken by the religious right. And it is going to put women's lives at risk. So, with that being said, now that life begins at conception and women are going to be breeding stock and we have to do everything in our power to, save the fetus inside of us until we're ready to give birth, I have some definite concerns with that. Number 1, women were considered property for all time. Going back to the Bible days with dowries and, in English history, dowries and marriages of advantage and improving your status in society, and the days of Mr. Darby, of Jane Austen and Charlotte Bronte, you know, men who had only daughters trying to make advantageous marriages for their daughters to ensure that they were taken care of after the father passed away, and that their property would not be dispersed upon their death, that they would make a good marriage for their daughter or daughters so that their family property would be preserved. And so let's be honest, that was brought to America with the colonists, where women were property. But over the course of 200 years, women and others, men who were sympathetic to the cause of women, they joined with us and they fought for us in order for us to have equal opportunity. So I would just like to go over, some of the advances that have been made. Once again, this is on my screen because there's no way I could keep all of this stuff in my head. Um, but initially, in the legal system in the U.S., women were technically considered the property of their husbands through the doctrine of coverture, which basically meant that women couldn't own property, they couldn't sign contracts, they couldn't represent themselves legally in court or in legal proceedings of any kind or in business dealings. But women fought and won key rights. So in 1920, women won the right to vote, and that was for white women. Let's be honest, we didn't treat everybody equally at the same time. And then in 1972, we got equal education rights through Title IX, which prohibited sex-based discrimination in any federally funded education programs. In 1965 and 1972, women won the right to contraception. In Griswold v. Connecticut in 1965, married couples were awarded the right to contraception. And then in 1972, Supreme Court case Eisenstadt v. Baird, unmarried women were finally legally able to have access to birth control. And so that began the empowerment of women to choose when, how, and the size of their family. So it finally gave women autonomy over their bodies. In 1973, we had Roe v. Wade, where women were given the right to seek an abortion before viability of the fetus. Now, that's a big misconception because we had Dobbs case that overturned Roe here last year, year before, where everybody's saying, oh, yeah, they just gave that back to the states. The states never had authority over abortion. From Roe v. Wade until Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health in 2022, so from 1973 to 2022, the people, women, had control over abortion. They had bodily autonomy. When the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, they took that away from women, from the people, from we the people. They took it away from us and gave it to the states. That was a usurpation of power. That was not just giving something back to the states, because the states never had it to begin with. So let's just be clear on that. In the right to own property, so women did not have the right to really own property. They got a little bit of rights to that in like 1839 when married women, they had the Married Women's Property Act, so married women could own property. But it wasn't until 1974 that women were able to have equal access to credit, to have their own bank or checking account, to apply for a credit card. And then women were not able to sign for their own business license and business loan without a male cosigner until 1988. It wasn't until 1993 in this country that it was illegal in every state for a husband to rape his wife. So I want you to think about that. So really, women were still considered the property of their husbands in the United States as recently as 1993. So we haven't been free really for that long. Only about 30 years have we been free from that, which that's disturbing. Um, then let's see. Then you have the equal employment and equal employment opportunity. So that was some of that was with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Some of that came with Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. So basically, that prohibits employers from discriminating in hiring practices, employment practices, compensation, time off, all that stuff, based on uh, sex or gender. And then the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, we didn't get that until 2009, which said women have a right to equal pay for equal work. There was pregnancy discrimination up until about 1978 when we got the first pregnant workers protection laws. And then this has made people very angry on the right. Very angry. So women being able to get good jobs, get a good education, decide whether or not or when they want to have children. This has made people very angry. Mostly, in my opinion, and there are other people that you can go look at online, believe me or agree with me. Basically, if you want to have a country run by corporations, oligarchs, plutocracy, whatever you want to call it, you need control over the minions, the workers. Okay. So, with women having equal rights and women being able to go out and get jobs and provide for themselves and not have to be, married to be provided for, this lowers birth rates. If you lower birth rates through that, or through allowing abortion, you then don't have the labor pool that you need to fill your military with poor working class people that don't have any other option, so they can be sent off to fight rich men's wars, or to, in the history of this country, to work in your coal mines or to do your dangerous jobs where you can be disposable. If you don't believe me, within the last week, there's been a bill submitted to the U.S. House of Representatives to completely abolish OSHA, to get rid of all worker health and safety protections in this country. That right there says workers are expendable. And so if you go back 100 or years or so, you would find the company town, right? You had the railroads had them, the mining companies had them, but basically the company built a town. The workers, the men worked, and they, got a housing unit to live in. There was a company store. They shopped at the company store. And then at the end of the month, they got their wages, and whatever they owed for rent and whatever they owed for the company store was deducted from their wages before they got paid. And if you quit your job, you lost your house, you lost your income, and you would be destitute because you relied on your company for everything. So this is super scary because we have seen over the last 10 years corporations snapping up single family homes, but also like the BlackRocks snapping up housing complexes, apartment complexes, a lot of luxury condo type buildings, but still we are seeing corporations infiltrate the housing market and drive up houses. And if we have a huge spike in unemployment, economic downturn, you're going to see companies are going to start coming up with benefits of like, hey, we have housing. Come work for us. You can live in company housing. And that gives them control over you and your whole family. So one of the first steps of all of this is to get women out of the workforce, to get women out of higher education, to limit the opportunities for women so they become dependent on men again for their livelihood, for their basic needs. And then the more concerning part of this is when women don't have opportunity, when women are dependent on men, you have the opportunity for women to be stuck in domestic violence situations. And that's really the heart of the matter that I want to get at. So I am a fourth generation survivor of domestic violence. My mom was lucky. She got out, but she was really smart. She had a better lawyer, and then she met my stepdad, who's freaking amazing. Best dad that you could ever want, and totally chose to be that dad. But my grandmother, um, she talked to me because she knew that I was living with an abuser. Like, she saw the hidden signs, I guess, is what you would say. But she would talk to me about her mother and about my grandpa's mother, how their husbands just completely degraded them, physically assaulted them. Um, and my grandpa's mother, her abuse was so bad that she was actually granted a divorce in the 1930s, which was completely unheard of. And my grandma said that when they got married, she had a conversation with him that if you ever lay hands on me, I will be gone. My grandma was a tough bird. I'm not kidding you. But my grandpa watched his mom be abused, and so he did not lay hands on his wife. Now, he did spank my mom and siblings, and there was physical punishment in that house. It was a farmhouse in the 1940s and 50s. So, I mean, we can imagine, there was physical discipline, I'm sure. Um, but he did not lay hands on my grandmother. So then my mom was in a domestic abuse marriage, which I didn't really realize because I didn't really see physical violence. But now looking back on it, it was very mentally manipulative, emotionally harmful, verbally abusive. And then my mom did tell me later in life that behind closed doors there was physical violence. Um, and things just, to intimidate and harass and threaten. So I remember like one time he busted out all the windows of a rental car that she had because we got in a car accident. Um, he would destroy things, slam doors, just being physically intimidating, I guess. So when I got married, there were some red flags, but like I grew up in a chaotic situation, so it was normal to me. And not until after I had my first child did it become physically and sexually violent. I'm not going to go into all of that, but it took me 10 years, 4 months, and 6 days from the first time that my husband almost killed me in order for me to get my life in order so that I had a job with enough income where I could take care of my two children if I had never got any child support, where I could afford a place to live, to have a vehicle that was dependable so I could get to and from work and get the kids to and from all of their stuff. I was very lucky. My parents were both retired at the time, so my parents would come when I was super busy with work, or I had two kids in two different sports in every season, and my kids were opposite gender, so they were never, not until they were in swimming, were they at the same practice at the same time on the same days and the same competitions at the same time on the same days. So I was very lucky. I had a lot of help from my parents. And I think mostly, I think my mom knew. Well, she didn't know because I finally told her. And my husband tried to assault me in front of her finally after, 10 years. So that being said, I was very lucky because I had a lot of help. It took me a long time to get everything in order and to get that help, but I was very lucky because I was able to get out. I was able to get out because we had people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg who fought for equality. I was very lucky because we had Roe versus Wade, which said, life doesn't begin at conception. So in secret, after my second child was born, I got an IUD without telling him because there was no way that I was going to get stuck. Because at the time, he demanded that I quit my job and stay home and be a stay-at-home mom. And I knew that if I had another kid, I would never get out. So in secret, I got an IUD. Under the Health and Human Services policy that is in Project 2025, IUDs are very likely to be made illegal because they prevent implantation, which occurs after conception. So if you don't understand how babies are made, the sperm meets the egg, it fertilizes, it travels down the fallopian tube, everything goes okay, then it gets to the uterus, it implants in the wall of the uterus, and then it develops the placenta and the umbilical cord where it can transfer oxygen and nutrients between fetus and woman. Um, so under the policy that is listed in Project 2025, it is very likely that any contraceptive method that would prevent implantation of a fertilized egg would be made illegal. So that means your implants, I don't know what they're called today, but when I was, young 20s, it was like Norplant or something. Your IUDs, your hormonal birth control, which is one that like causes you to shed the lining of your uterus every month. So that prevents implantation of a fertilized egg. That one also would be not allowed under a policy of life begins at conception. And then I think there was one other one. Injections like Depo, they would not be allowed either. So um, you basically would be left with abstinence and condoms for your birth control. So in a society where 1 in 4 women encounter sexual violence at least one time in their life, it would be up to your rapist to decide whether or not he wanted to wear a condom. Um, and absolutely zero choice on your part. Yeah, so super scary there. Uh, and what I will tell you is one of the tactics that my um, now ex-husband used was he would drug my food. So I would wake up, 14 hours later and not have any idea what had happened to me. So, um, good thing I got that IUD. Your Plan B and your morning after pill would also be um, outlawed if Project 2025, the Life Begins at Conception that's written in the Health and Human Services policy, was completely enacted. So you have that to look forward to. Um, so other things that I would like to talk about. We also have several states have made moves to end no-fault divorce, and so this is where I get into the domestic violence aspect of all of this. So if you look at domestic violence statistics, you will see something like 1 in 4 women will encounter some type of domestic violence in their lifetime. Um, Coercive control is becoming a big deal, which, I mean, I could go into that's a whole nother conversation in and of itself. But the Texas legislature, and I want to say also maybe Arkansas, I can't remember, but they proposed, let's see, okay, Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, and South Dakota. Last year, all of them proposed travel bans on pregnant women. That pregnant women would not be allowed to travel outside of their state, because they might be going to get an abortion. And if you're not aware of your constitutional rights, there are Supreme Court cases dating back decades that say Americans have freedom of travel. So complete infringement on your constitutional rights there. Also, we will look at Marjorie Taylor Greene in 2023. She proposed a bill in Congress that was called the Protecting Life and Conscience Act, and it was basically a bill to set up a registry to get women to go onto a website, pregnancy.gov, and to register that they were pregnant, and then they could be tracked. We also could get into geofencing, where law enforcement can set up a digital perimeter, and if you go inside that perimeter, they can pull data off your phone. So if you have an ovulation tracker or anything on your phone, I would totally get rid of that. I would not be doing that. I can do another video on geofencing and explain to you like how that works and how to totally invade your privacy. I won't get into it here, but if you have a period tracker on your phone, on your smartwatch, whatever, if you live in a red state, get rid of it. Because they can set up these geofences. They can know everything on your phone. What else? We also have, several states have restricted abortion rights. So Iowa now has a 6-week ban. Um, most of the red states. I'm not even gonna go through them. Like if you live in a state that has an abortion ban, you already know about it. Some of the other things that are going on, limiting access to Planned Parenthood or limiting funding to Planned Parenthood. The last time I looked, abortion services at Planned Parenthood were like 3 to 7% of their services. The rest of their services are STD testing, contraceptives, cervical and ovarian cancer screenings for low-income women. Planned Parenthood saves lives, and we are defunding them because, once again, poor and working class people are disposable under Project 2025, and basically to anybody on the far right. All we are is a labor pool to mine their coal and run their factories and build their stuff, and to die while we do it and be replaced by somebody else who's waiting in a bread line, and they're making them get a job before they can get bread. So just remember that. So we are limiting access to healthcare. With all these abortion bans, it's also having an impact on our rural healthcare facilities and providers. So rural areas are losing their OBGYNs. So if you have a high-risk pregnancy and you live in a rural area, good luck, honey. Like, good luck. Because you are not going to be able to get adequate health care. And if you have a complication, you're going to have to get a ride in an ambulance and hope that you don't lose that baby before you get there. And then also I read something earlier, that like 200 women have been jailed for miscarriages since Roe was overturned. And basically, if you have a miscarriage, they can charge you with destroying your fetus or whatever they call it. So pray to God you don't have a high risk pregnancy and live in a rural area in a red state where you can't get an OBGYN. So, okay, so now we'll get to the domestic violence stuff. Domestic violence and women's access to equal opportunity they're critically connected. Okay, so my grandmother, thank God that my grandpa learned from watching what his mom lived through, and my grandpa was not abusive to my grandma. Thank God. And thank God that my mom got out. She was married for 18 years. She got out and met a really great guy. He's amazing. But many women were not so lucky, right? Because before 1972, women couldn't have their own bank account, couldn't get their own credit card, couldn't sign for a car loan, buy their own car, couldn't sign for a home loan, buy their own home. Before 1988, you couldn't start your own business and have your own like autonomous income. Before 1993, your husband could rape you and it was not a crime. Before the Lilly Ledbetter Act, you didn't have equal pay, and so all of these things have gained women their independence and make it now possible that if you are in a domestic violence situation, you can get out. Now, the other key factor to this is no fault divorce. So no fault divorce, I think the first state was like 1959, 1960s, like California, but by 1985, every state in the nation was recognizing no fault divorce. And why this is important is no fault divorce allows you to get a divorce without having to prove that the other party did something to cause the breakdown of the marriage relationship. Now, each state would have their own, whatever those things are. So it could be abuse, adultery, drunkenness. Those are the common ones. But a woman who was in an abusive marriage would have to prove that she was being subject to abuse in order to get a divorce. And if she was in a marriage like mine, I only had physically visible injuries probably on 3 or 4 occasions. The rest of it was, slamming my head into something, sexual violence, being drugged, being having a pillow held over my face, and being deprived of oxygen until I would comply or agree. Having my children threatened, having my dogs threatened, having a gun held to my head, or being woken up at 2 in the morning with a gun to my head. So you can't prove those things. You can't. So if we right now, the several of the red states are introducing bills to rescind no fault divorce availability and go back to a fault based divorce system. Um, One of the states, I think Indiana, also, if you're the one that files for divorce, you can't be awarded child support. I think as I read that in some article, I was like, oh, okay. So basically, they are trying to completely remove women's autonomy and put us back in these marriages where we are in danger. We are in danger. So, um, also with that, you would see, um, you hear everybody these days, oh, they're a narcissist, they're a narcissist, they're a narcissist. Well, they're not really a narcissist, okay? 100%, I will agree with you. If you look at the statistics in actual diagnosed narcissists, only about 5 to 7% of the US population is narcissist. So, more men than women. So probably about like 3.5 to 4% men in that in that category. But the National Institutes of Health had a study, and you can't get to it because the website's blocked right now. Imagine that. And also on the CDC, the domestic violence website, the statistics, that was gone too in this new administration. So good luck finding statistics on domestic violence. But anyway, if you look at the different traits of a narcissist, there's like grandiosity, and then the important one is the entitled exploitative trait. The entitled exploitative trait is basically a measure of how much or how um, predisposed somebody is to use other people for their own gain, pleasure, enjoyment, and then how much they feel like the world owes them and what they feel like the world owes them. And so if you look at the entitled exploitative trait in this National Institutes of Health study that I found, um, about 12 to 15% of men score very highly on that, even though they're not a narcissist. So, with that being said, you're looking at about, I don't know, 14 to 18% of the population of men that either are a narcissist or score high on this exploitative entitled scale, which means they will exploit their partner for their own benefit, gain, enjoyment, humor, whatever it may be. And when you have a male partner, and I mean, men could experience this too if it was a woman doing it, I'm sure. But when you have a partner and a male partner who is, biologically stronger, that kind of stuff, who is either a narcissist or is on the high on the entitled exploitative scale, they are going to cause damage to their partner. That's just what's going to happen. Because there's not really a treatment to fix those things. So, about 1 out of 5 women would be at risk of being in a dangerous relationship. So, some other statistics that I found as I was doing some research on domestic violence is I think about 20% of domestic violence homicides. The homicide is actually the first act of physical violence because the perpetrator has been able to control their victim up until that point with intimidation, threats, rape, threatening children or animals or other family members. So, like I said, about 20% of domestic violence homicides, the homicide is the first actually overt act of physical violence. And then another key indicator that means this is a huge societal problem is in about 20% of domestic violence homicides, the victim is actually not the person killed, the abuse victim. The murder victim actually ends up being a family member, a child of the victim, a responding law enforcement officer, a friend, a neighbor, somebody that tried to intervene. Um, so this isn't just a family problem, like this is a societal problem.
To recap all of this information, it was a lot of information. You can actually go to the posts on the YouTube page at Madison Payne 1776. There's a lot of information there on domestic violence if you want to review it. But to recap, it has taken 200 years for women to achieve equality, to be considered an entire person, have autonomy over their body, their finances, their future. And we are watching a policy or a government administration be put into place that threatens to take all of that away. It still is difficult today to get out of a domestic violence marriage. Most of the states, at least 40 out of 50, don't really have a way to recognize non-physical violence during divorce proceedings, to provide orders of protection, or to set up boundaries or barriers to give the victim the peace and quiet and the separation in order to see the process through. There is still a lot of opportunity for the abuser to control through kind of unseen means, such as legal, financial, spiritual, to where the victim still is under their control. I believe I've read that it takes, on average, about 7 attempts for a domestic violence victim to actually leave their abuser. So regardless of what people tell you, even with no-fault divorce, even with, the equal opportunity for employment and finances and property, it is still extremely difficult for a victim of domestic violence to get away from their abuser and establish an independent life and be free. With the move to eliminate no-fault divorce, it'll only go back the other way, to where it's even more difficult for an abuse victim to achieve their independence and their freedom. And it will continue to be dangerous, and women will die, children will die. And as we saw in the statistics, about 1 out of 5 times it will be a law enforcement officer, a first responder, a family member, a neighbor, just somebody trying to step in. So rolling back these protections and these gains that women have earned over the last 200 years is extremely dangerous, and we need to fight against it.